Welcome to Project-Based Learning. Throughout this presentation, you're going to get a detailed description of the major components, how they relate to standards, and why this is a great tool to use for your students for them to demonstrate knowledge of your subject. So here are some of the major components and the 8 essential elements of project-based learning, and we're going to go through each of those 8 and how they relate to PBL. First, you need to have access to your national PE standards. And for project-based learning, you can do this for health also, but we're going to primarily focus on physical education. So you're going to want to have access to the national standards as well as your state standards and your district curriculum. Project-based learning is defined several different ways. So just take a couple minutes and go through each of these definitions so that you have the real concrete description of what project-based learning is. So 21st century skills has been a big buzz term for a few years now, and what project-based learning does is it allows students to really work on and work through each of those main 4 critical skills. So critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and creativity. So here are some things that you need to know. As the teacher, your task will be to develop the quality problem for the students. This is where you're going to begin the process. The fact that you've elected to take this course shows that you have some interest in what project-based learning is, can be, and how it will be utilized with your students. As I mentioned before, you do need to refer to your national and state standards as well as your district curriculum. Here's where you need to really start shifting your thinking from a teacher that is up at the front of the room doing the lecture, the PowerPoints. Really, you are in charge towards how are you going to create a student-centered classroom, allow them to take charge and excuse me, ownership of their learning. This is where you may become uncomfortable. You do a lot of the work on the forefront. So when you're actually with your students, your job is to present the issue or the problem, and then you're really going to facilitate the process. The fun part will be seeing your students and how they start really thinking through how they want to go about solving this problem. So you're not going to be standing in front of the classroom and lecturing. And the nice thing about this is we think of traditional projects that we do with our students as this is kind of the end of the unit. We're going to give them a project to kind of put all the pieces together for what they've learned. And really, if you do project-based learning correctly, the entire process covers all of the material from the unit. So your driving question, this is one thing that sometimes people can find difficult to do, but the goal of a quality driving question is to really ensure student focus. It guides the student work and it helps to initiate their action. And what I also have tried to do throughout this is just give you some additional links to additional resources for each of these main pieces and components of PBL. So student voice and choice. Throughout project-based learning, students are given the opportunity to guide their own learning. By allowing students to choose whether to create, build, draft, or write their answer to the driving question gives them ownership in and of their learning. This is where you really reel them in. Once they realize that you are allowing them some of the ownership throughout this whole process of how they get to demonstrate their knowledge, then they can move towards something that's interesting to them, but still through your facilitation keeps them on task with where you want them to be. Students are more engaged in their learning, and especially when they believe that there's relevance and purpose to the assignment. So it's not a word search, it's not a crossword puzzle. This is a real situation, a real issue, and you are asking them, how are you going to solve this? In-depth inquiry. Students guide their own research related to their driving question. Again, this is where you're facilitating the process. So now students have their driving question, an idea of what they want to do, and now need to justify their response with real facts and information. They've developed a plan of action and need your guidance to keep them on track. Reflection and revision. So during this phase of PBL, students they've developed their driving question, they've divided the work and the responsibilities. This is where they have student voice and choice. They've completed the research, and they're ready to share with outside agencies, which would be you as the teacher and other students, their plan. This is a fun part because you do a walkthrough or a rehearsal and allow them to seek feedback. So they're sharing their main ideas, what they want to do with you and other students, and this is where other students can ask questions throughout their process to what might make sense or what they're trying to make sure they understand. And the final piece is that after they get the feedback from their peers and from you as the teacher, they go back and put on the finishing touches. The audience presentation. This is the grand finale. Students have labored through all the phases of PBL, and you will feel like maybe these first few times that you have labored through them also. And teachers, you set a time or an event for students to showcase their work. So maybe it's an after-school event, it's something during the day where you invite other classes, other teachers, and the students really get to show off all of what they have done and their main project that they have created to demonstrate how they've gone through and decided how to solve this question. So assessment. How are you going to ensure students are on task? As the teacher, you will decide what components of the project you will grade for your summative assessment as well as for your periodic formative assessments. This may be a period of trial and error for you and may seem daunting at the onset of initiating project-based learning. And you may, the first time you do this, you may go through and you have all these assessments that you want to do throughout every process, and you may find that it just takes up too much time. You can't keep up with it. It seems laborious for the students. And so that's where you'll kind of figure that piece out as you go through the process. And it may be that as you refine your facilitation skills, you may feel that students may not need as many assessments throughout the process if they really are staying on task. But this allows you and the students to know that you are holding them accountable for each of the main components and throughout this entire process. And the students will need and seek your approval. So what's next? After you've gone through this presentation, I want you to think about the relevance project-based learning may have to your curriculum, your school, and your student population. Also think about the cross-curricular opportunities that project-based learning may have for your students. Think about how implementing project-based learning in the world of health and physical education might enhance the development of 21st century skills for students. So these are the main questions that I really want you to think about. Go through this presentation again, click on some of the links, look at the different resources, and once you've had a chance to do that and really let this sink in, I would like for you to answer each of those 3 questions on the discussion board.